My name is Cheri Helt, and I represent the beautiful city of Bend. I am very excited to testify about Bill 3242 with the -2s today. In Bend, one of the reasons that I am here before you as the representative of Bend is to help our housing crisis. We have a very severe housing crisis as we're the 4th largest growing city in the United States. In the last year alone, our median home price rose 9.4%. Our current median price of a home listed for sale in Bend is approximately $520,000. That's more than $500,000. I know I've never been able to afford a home that expensive. We desperately need to be able to fix our housing crisis. And the way that I believe that we need to do that is through supply. Our supply is affected by the processes that are set by our state. First, there's a UGB process, and Bend took 13 years for their current UGB process to be adopted. And then after the UGB process was adopted, there was a plot of land that is approximately 20% of the area that we're allowed to grow in, that was put up unanimously for sale by the State Board of Lands. So the governor, the Secretary of State, and the treasurer. They asked for this land to be to be put up for sale declared surplus land and to be investigated to be put up for sale in October of 2017. That land today is still not up for sale. It still has not had an appraisal finished. And there are many processes that overlay that make land use special in Oregon. I believe we have to make these processes work for us so that we can preserve the processes that have been put in place by leaders that have been in this Capitol before we occupied this space. I think if we don't find a way to make these processes more nimble and are not able to utilize the processes, we jeopardize the processes themselves. And so with this plot of land, when we're trying to grow into this plot of land, it took us 13 years to get the plot of land approved. And then it's going to take over 7 years before we can put a for sale sign on it. That's before development. We're talking 2 decades of time before we're allowed to grow into this parcel of land. That piece of land will hold 1,100 homes approximately to help us in our much needed growth. Again, we're the 4th largest growing city in the United States, and we must have processes that are nimble enough to accommodate our growth, or else we see these rise in home prices that we're seeing in the last year of 9.4% alone. So I hope that we can find a way to preserve the processes of our land use, because I believe that our land use processes are well intended and keep our growth and keep our farmland, but I do know that we need to make them work for us. And so with Senate Bill 3242, I'm trying to address the fact that we need to sell these land parcels and get them approved. And I believe that it's imperative. This piece of land that we have that has not been sold yet and is not up for sale yet is a 340-acre plot of land. And so one of the things that I think we could also do and look at is putting these processes over top of each other so that when we're completing studies like environmental studies, appraisal process, cultural and historic studies, geological studies, utilities and assessment, conceptual master plans, we could have them happen at the same time. There's no reason that we need to finish one process before we start the other process. We could buy ourselves a lot of time by streamlining some of these processes. And so what I have before you is my first and second attempt of trying to make our process nimble enough to accommodate our growth. And I think that when we look at our state lands, we want to make sure that we're getting the most money that we can for our state school fund, because it's our fiduciary duty. And if we're not nimble enough to sell a piece of land before 7 years, I don't know that we're able to do our fiduciary duty for the state school fund. And so it's my hope that we could address the process in which lands are sold and how these processes could overlap, and be able to move these processes forward. Thank you.
Chair Holvey, Vice Chair Wilson, members of the committee, for the record, Erik Kancler here representing the City of Bend. And I think you'll find that our perspective is quite similar to Representative Helt's. So the premise of the bill is simple. Cities have within them and in their surrounding expansion areas significant amounts of state-owned surplus lands, and I should say some cities. Bend is certainly one of them. And then with those land holdings lies tremendous potential for a variety of goals, housing, economic development. For example, the process of making the surplus lands available for housing is often fairly arduous. Sometimes it's not very clear. So as you all know, and as Representative Helt has also pointed out, we do have a statewide housing supply crisis that is particularly dire in the city of Bend, and we have many other communities that need land for housing as well to build that, build the housing supply. So we have, it's not just the Stevens Road tract, which is 20% of our recent expansion. We do have other lands within our existing UGB and within existing city limits that we hope to be able to realize potential on as well. But with the Stevens Road tract, which is a piece of common school fund, it is owned by the Department of State Lands. And I've distributed a map just so that you can orient yourself. It is number 12 on the map. It's in yellow down in the lower right portion. So this is a piece of land that, of course, is constitutionally limited in how the agency can handle it. It is constitutionally limited in how it can ultimately sell that land. But from a land use planning perspective, which is the perspective of the local government, it's clearly been identified to meet specific needs, and it was brought in for that potential. So we have a very real interest in realizing it for that potential. It has over 1,000 housing units that we anticipate building on that land, and I think nearly 1,000 jobs that we anticipate deriving from that land as well. Now, it would be easy for us to sit back and say, hey, Department of State Lands, what's the holdup? You know, what's the problem? We're ready to go. But I think the reality is not that simple. It's really not easy to ascribe blame, because what we're talking about here really is the intersection of two different realms of policy. We have the the local land use process, and we have the state lands management process. Historically, I don't know that we've ever really looked at these surplus state lands as having such critical value for housing, but we're at a point in time where when a piece like this comes into the UGB, we don't know how necessarily to address it at the local level. The state doesn't know how to address it either. And so we have this unique intersection of policy areas that we've never had an opportunity or really a need to explore before. And the housing crisis is really what is forcing that reevaluation. I think some of you may remember in 2016, this legislature passed House Bill 4079, which ultimately led to the ability for Bend to have a roughly, I think, 35-acre UGB expansion pilot program. And we passed legislation this very session to extend that opportunity to the city of Redmond as well. The Stevens Road tract, the portion of it that is already inside the UGB, is about 10 times that big. And we have another 40% still outside the UGB. So from our perspective, certainly this is a matter worthy of legislative consideration in light of its potential. So we did draft, we attempted to provide input in the form of the -2 amendment. It requires a couple things to happen. Local government, from the local government perspective, it's things that, a number of things that made sense to us to get the appraisal moving, to marshal resources within the agency to get the land ready for sale. And when we discussed with the agencies, they were strongly opposed to it. And so the way I think about it, I think the way we think about it, is that if our smart people who really know how to plan for growth, and they're smart people who really understand how to manage state lands, can't have a coherent conversation about what we do next with a common understanding, we really have a lot of work to do in front of us. So our question has been, if not the -2, then what? And I think not only would we like to find a way to do something on this issue this session, it's pretty clear we're not going to find a silver bullet. We're not going to solve all of the problems. So I think what we'd really like to see, and this doesn't just pertain to Stevens Road, it pertains broadly to surplus lands throughout the state, is to have a real deliberate, meaningful conversation in the interim to identify with some of these more difficult pieces of land, what are the best management practices? What are the alignments that we can find without having to change statute? And then where are the pinch points in statute? And we have to believe that there are some. So I suppose ultimately, and I'll conclude with this, this is a bigger conversation. It is an urgent conversation in light of the potential and the magnitude of our housing crisis. So we would simply urge this committee to give serious attention to the matter. Thank you.
Thank you.